morning, people of the internet. You're listening to Debi Radio 79.5 FM, a podcast where we discuss the movie Grosse Pointe Blank 1 minute at a time. I'm your co-host, Hugh David.
And I'm your other co-host, Dev Sodiga. And on today's minute, we are going to be watching minute 18 of Grosse Pointe Blank. And joining us on today's show, we have got Catcher Later, GPB fan extraordinaire. Hey, Catcher.
Hi.
So, we are back to the Ambassador Bridge, and we kind of left it hanging yesterday with this series of cuts. So, you want to speak a little bit more about this?
I don't know if I have a big thought on this one yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like this is a really good narrative setting one up.
It did just put it, sorry, as soon as it switched, I did remember something, is that everybody's relationships in this are somewhat, not contentious necessarily, but everybody's pretty cranky with each other.
Antagonistic?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the FBI guys are no different. Like the very first time we're introduced to them, they're trying to outdo each other, you know, and so yeah, that was my thought on that part, was that even they're bickering.
Yeah.
Even they feel that frenetic energy of things that are happening, and they're at it as well.
Stephen Lardner and Kenneth McCullers. Yeah.
Nice.
They are in, and of course the incredibly famous Hank Azaria at this point, voice of many Simpsons things, somewhat controversially for those of us of a South Asian descent, but
yes, you and I have had that conversation before.
We have had that conversation.
I am not going to bring that up here because there's a name we could mention and could probably get into a lot of trouble with for dissing him, but we're not going to.
But you're right. Like there is a very kind of not tense relationship, but somewhat confrontational between them. In every sequence of the film, they kind of, it feels like they've got that like love-hate relationship. These two, they clearly work together a lot, but they also like kind of butt heads a bit, and they think they have different ways of doing things. And it just, even in this like, you know, few seconds of clip, you get that sense so clearly. It's very, once again, like very concisely well communicated without feeling like it's belaboring the point or exposition to the lowest common denominator. In
general, I love the lack of exposition in this. Like that is a very Grosse Pointe Blank specific value to me, is that I don't like things being over-explained to me, even if I don't, like you mentioned before, get it the first time, and that's okay in this movie. I appreciate that. I like not being talked down to and over-explained, and I enjoy all of that.
And for me, it's a big part of why I love this movie.
Yeah.
I've mentioned as much, but it's also part of why I would go back and rewatch this movie, because for many, many reviewings of it, I was discovering a little bit here and there, catching words that I didn't quite make out previously, understanding narrative elements that have been brought in before the fact without giving you any insight as to why they were there. So yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that one.
And with their style, I'm going to say we accepted it. We accepted that this was how this movie was going to go and this movie was going to flow. And it just doesn't let you go. Yep. There's not time to think, oh, should I have gotten some popcorn, or, you know, whatever it is. You're not, those intrusive thoughts don't happen during this particular movie because it's going at such a clip and there's so much information. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. And you know what? Generally speaking, I do like those long director's cuts of movies.
Yes.
I wonder if actually in this case that might be to the detriment of the movie.
Oh, because this is so...
Because this is so tight. It's so one thing after another. And if it gave you a little bit more breathing space in it, I wonder if you'd really notice that it wasn't holding quite as well.
I do notice that this does happen to be a minute where I did have a thought, and I have had it before briefly, is how do hitmen just hitmans, how do they get around? And then I realized that this is pre 9/11.
Exactly.
And so that's how they got around. Because I was like, how did Blank get there with all this weaponry in his hotel room? And I was like, pre 9/11, you could just bring your job with you. But and did he rent that car?
Oh, we've had this discussion, actually.
Have you? Okay.
No, it's really glad you bring it up again, because actually it hadn't occurred to me. I was assuming that Martin's car is the one we see him in earlier in the film in LA is his car because of the phone, the fax, all these things built into it. But Dev was pointing out at the time that actually, why would it have to be his? Maybe he just rented the latest, business appropriate.
I think for me, and maybe for you, Catch, this is a symptom of the type of car that he's driving. Because if you see a Lincoln Town Car, which is, I'm pretty sure the make and model, is the assumption is that it's either for government work or it's a rental, because those are the two things that Lincoln Town Cars are used for.
Yeah.
And now you've got the Suburbans, which have kind of taken the place of this, but black Lincoln Town Car screams government/business rental.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And so I just assumed that it's like, seeing somebody being driven in a yellow cab. You wouldn't assume that it's their own private cab with their own private chauffeur. You just assume it's a New York taxi cab.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. That he's driving it himself, so I'm assuming he's just rented it. But at the same time, like it's clearly the same make and model here as it was in LA. So maybe he just road tripped it.
Did he have that kind of time? See, this is why we can't
it could be part of that procrastination gambit, right? Where except Marcella gives him flights, right? He's got tickets.
Exactly.
So clearly not the case, but it definitely feels that way. And at the time we were discussing this, Hugh, I don't think I'd really twigged that he was living in LA. So in that sense, honestly, he probably still used a rental because he would want to make it that bit harder to track it back to him, right? Because he was just leaving a thing. I also have to say that the long shot of downtown Detroit with the tower buildings really annoys me that I can now see the helicopter blades of the helicopter that the cameraman was operating out of. And every time it comes up on the screen, because we've got the minute on loop, it's irritating me a little bit more.
Really? Like, how else were they going to take the shot pre-drone?
Well, I mean, they could have just had the helicopter a little bit higher and not had the blades in the shot.
Well,
let them know.
Like the Ambassador Bridge shot is beautiful. It's a shame it's split across the 2 minutes, but it is a beautiful shot.
Maybe the stock footage was originally shot so that it would be masked at a different aspect ratio, and you wouldn't then see the blades.
Thank you. Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Like, really? I know we're doing minute by minute, but really, you're going to complain about stock footage?
In my defense, Hugh, there's very little I complain about in this movie, so I've got to find
That's true. Very true. Very true. But, dude, it's stock footage. Like, you can... Oh, dear.
It's going on stock footage day.
All right. Okay, so where are we? We are looking at... So, yes, we're coming in through a montage of shots that will eventually reveal us to not be anywhere near Detroit whatsoever. But the big landmarks are there for people who don't know Detroit and don't or enough to pick up on that. And if you don't know, that's fine, because at the beginning of the minute, Grosso is still talking to the FBI and he tells you where you're going. Because he's saying you need to go to Detroit to do this. So, for those of us who are not, aren't familiar with American geography, that works just as well. And it's a clever film like that. In talking with what you guys were saying about the editing, that's it. Armitage understood that if he'd left that scene with Grosser and then cut to it, it would be so much more normal, traditional, I guess. Beverly Hills Cop does it quite well, where it's like, you're going to Beverly Hills and then like cut, we're no longer in Detroit, and bang, we're in Beverly Hills, and the music changes and everything changes. Yeah. He would have done that, but because he's trimmed it that much more and he's overlapped the dialogue, it feels, it just feels, as you said earlier, Catcher, the speed at which this is moving, the rapidity. Mm-hmm. And as you were saying, Dev, as well, it's just the way he's just crammed everything in. Yeah. But yeah, you get all of this information delivered. There's no repetition. There's no time to come back on it. There's no point where he's saying, "Hey, just in case you didn't notice," boom. It's like no. We're just going to tell you and get on with it.
And honestly, even with Beverly Hills Cop, it does something like this, but I feel less elegantly, because I think it has that scene of Eddie Murphy kind of doing the sightseeing bit of
when he's looking out the car.
Right, which is exactly what Crocodile Dundee does as well. Yeah. Like
everyone else does that.
More like narrative way of doing it, whereas this is just using those interstitial shots.
Yeah, because they can't afford to do anything else.
Right, but also I feel like it gets you there quicker. Mm-hmm. It's less fourth wall breaking.
Yep.
It's just contextualizing what you're seeing in a very elegant way, and like that's something I always find impressive in movies, because I don't really remember ever having consciously seen any kind of education on like, this is how you set a location, right? Like in a purely visual way, without any narrative, without any acting, like purely constructing it from B-roll. You've always got like those single broad sweeping vistas, but this is doing it in a more energetic, fast-paced, cut to this, cut to this, cut to this, cut to this, in a way that you see the things, you acknowledge them, but you're not overwhelmed, and it feels like it's kind of like big bridge, big city, along the city, down into, it just leads you narratively, it leads you into this suburb of Detroit.
So I think that may partly be a fact of, when I say it's a function of budget, I don't mean it's not doing it in a cinematic way. What I mean is movies tend to, especially bigger budget movies, tend to spend more on showing you certain scenes and setting certain scenes because they have the money to say, look, we're actually there. Mm-hmm. Right? Stock footage is, especially in this way, is not just for the lower budget films. That's television. Yeah, that's very much less so now, but back in the day,
it's a title sequence for a TV show.
Absolutely,
this clip is absolutely
and all those 60s
and then
shows.
It's got that zooming in on the car. You can't see who's in the car, but it's meant to give you that impression. And then the next shot is actually from the wrong side of the windshield, so that you show Martin in the same type of car. So clearly, it's the same car in the same place, and you've just been. Like, you're cut in a way that you're not consciously seeing it.
The thing is, that was like a standard thing in spy films and spy fiction, like all those ITV shows in the late 50s and early 60s that were like, they're supposed to be in wherever, I don't know, Geneva or somewhere, and like, they are sitting in a studio in Buckinghamshire, in a fake cafe and everything. So you had the shot of Geneva, which was the stock footage, and then now we're clearly not there. And I'm actually thinking of a specific episode of Danger Man because apart from the fact that I used to work for the company that put that out, I used to also live in Geneva, and so it really did my head in when I was watching back this episode, and I was like, wait, what? And then realized that everyone does that. Every 60s show did this, and it's one of those lovely things that kind of, I don't know, American TV did it a bit with American locations, but when you don't live in America, you took a while to go, oh wait, this is all being filmed in LA, and we just have the stock footage of other places, right? Like Stephen J. Cannell's stuff in the 80s, or like the A-Team and everything, it's just all shot in LA, but there's always scenes and stuff of where they're supposed to be. And I remember thinking, we got to that point in the 90s where everyone was like, oh, okay, no, we can afford a bit more for television, we'll go on locations, make it look a bit better. And then in the early noughties, we got Alias, and I loved the fact that Alias was just like, yep, unapologetic about it. We are just going to do it the way we always did it, old school. We are not leaving LA, but you will be in Mexico and India and Turkey. I love that stuff, and I feel like it's appropriate for a Hitman movie to have that little bit of like spy movie trope,
ironically, I'd not realized that Alias was shot in LA. For some reason, I thought it was part of the Toronto lot.
Oh, it might have been. It might have been. I may be wrong, but the point is that it went all over the world, supposedly.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I love that. I just used to find that so funny.
So we should also talk in this minute for folks who are now 18 episodes in with us and still wondering why the hell we've gone Debi Radio 79.5 FM. Clearly, 79.5 FM is not a real radio broadcast signal.
Thank God.
You see Martin dialed into 79.5 FM, which is WGPM FM, which is the radio station that Debi is the DJ of. So the reason for our episode name is taken, unsurprisingly, straight out of the movie, and this is the minute that we get to see that as he's tuning his radio. For those of you that are younger than millennial, tuning a radio is what you had to do before you just push buttons.
There are people younger than.
Wow. Wow.
It saddens me that these things have to be explained. But
did you notice there's also in the dashboard there's the cassette tape punch in?
Yeah,
I into cassette tapes, but
again, to explain.
Yeah, right. Let's just nix that cassette tape.
Well, I can't remember what band I was looking at the other day on Facebook, and they were like, 500 limited copies of a new album on cassette. And I was like, okay, we're back around again.
Yeah.
Here we go again.
It's time for some magnetic strip that decays naturally over time.
Just my favorite. Just my favorite media.
Yeah. I had
over time properly.
If I had not spent as much money as I did on VHS and cassettes and audio cassettes, I would probably be a lot wealthier.
I can see
I know. There's still some there. There are, but and that is just a whole commentary on where we are with media at the moment. That these are things that I can't. There is something that I cannot get on DVD or Blu-ray. It has never advanced from that era. Those have, thankfully, but that one hasn't. That one there, the only way you can see that still is to have that British VHS, because there's no American one. There's no American DVD of it. The American DVD set tried to license it and couldn't get it. It's just, I can't bring myself to get rid of it. It's stupid, I know, right?
No, it's not stupid. It's cool. I think it's really cool. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think this makes for a great recording for those not watching YouTube.
Sorry, yeah.
Visual cues.
Yeah, quickly for the people that are listening to us only. Behind me is in my office. There's a couple of crates stuffed full of VHS tapes. Still, I was simply pointing out a couple of them. There's an old American miniseries called "Something Is Out There," which had John Dykstra effects and starred Mariam Dabo from James Bond's Living Daylights. It was a miniseries and then got turned into a single season series. Of the season you can get on DVD, but you can't get the miniseries. And the other one is Max Headroom, which was a short-lived. It was a British pilot, sci-fi pilot, by the two guys who would Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, who would go on to make the Super Mario Brothers movie, which killed their careers stone dead. They made this. They were given this task of making this pilot to introduce this character who was going to be used as a video jockey, as a VJ on a music show, and he was called Max Headroom. And the idea was that he was an AI. Yeah, exactly. Canadian actor Matt Frewer was made up and shot in a cool video way, and the idea was that he was an AI. So they created this backstory for him, which was an hour-long post-apocalyptic media satire movie that they made for Channel 4. And Channel 4, this was early days, this was the 80s, Channel 4 were like, yeah, you can go do that. Like, just make an entire movie just to explain this one character who's going to present music videos. And the American TV loved it. Was so like cult and well received that it was made into a TV show in America, quite a big budget show, lasted one season, cancelled. Anyway, those of you who are interested in these things, you can Shout Factory have done Shout TV have done the American version of Max Headroom. I own the British VHS of the original pilot, which is signed by Matt Frewer, by the way. That's the other thing. I got him to sign it at a con. Yeah, I met him at a con I was working at, and so I said to him, would you mind signing this? He's like, I can't believe you've got that. And I was like, yeah, I'm still hanging on to this. He's like, that is so cool. Because, yeah, that's the only way you can see it. So I do think the technology is interesting, because we've said before that Grosse Pointe Blank as a movie floats between different eras. Like, you can almost Like the lighting is often noirish in the offices.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of while we're in people in LA, people wear suits, and you know the style of the suits is slightly, you know, Arkin suits as Dr. Oatman could be from almost any era of male fashion on cinema. Martin Blank's is a little bit baggier, a little bit 80s, 90s, but it's not so outrageous that you couldn't get away with it now. But it's little things like this tech. It's the cassette. Like now the cassettes are coming back. Suddenly this film works again. Do you know what I mean? Isn't that weird? It's just so odd. This film is going to continue to float bit by bit. I suppose the thing that's probably the most different is because even the insides of schools are not that different now. Like you still have corridors and lockers and all that stuff. So I guess maybe it's the radio station is the thing that's going to tie it together.
The computers,
like you guys said in a previous episode, Grosse would still be using that kind of computer.
That's true, but there is one on Marcel's desk as well, which
that's true. That's true.
Motivated. But I mean, generally speaking, this is a pretty hard to date film in so many ways.
He's so young there. There he is, such a baby. It looks like.
Yeah.
It is that weird thing, isn't it? When we look back and see people, it's like, oh my god. But yeah,
what's the name of the actor playing Kenneth McCullers as well? I forgot his name.
K. Todd Freeman.
So I feel like he actually is one of the standout actors in a funny way, because he has been set up to basically always appear alongside Hank Azaria, and that is a tall order.
Yeah.
You know, Hank Azaria is, even at this time, you know, pretty well known. Not necessarily for his face, but obviously for his voice acting work. And he is quite, you know, talented in all of these ways, and he does an excellent job in this. But it's actually Kenneth McCullers that I always enjoy seeing in these conversations. And K. Todd Freeman really sells that. He really gives this character this kind of, yeah, I know everything kind of attitude, but also like not too far up himself in that regard. You know, he's the one that sat in the car brushing his teeth because they've gone out on a stakeout like first thing in the morning, and he's clearly not quite gotten around to that before they're actually having to follow after Martin Blank. And is, you know, telling jokes halfway through brushing his teeth as well. So yeah, I actually do really enjoy his character, and I almost wish that there was a little bit more of him on screen.
I mean, he's an interesting guy, because I suddenly realized how many TV shows he did in the 90s I saw, right? Like, he hadn't kind of clicked with me. And just before Grosse Pointe Blank, he was in the TV spin-off version of Dangerous Minds as a regular. But then after Grosse Pointe Blank, he starts to get into some really, like, he gets multi-episode arcs, which is a bit of a rare thing back then. And I think the one that most geek fans will know to him from is Buffy, because he was Mr. Trick.
Yeah, that's right.
I know him from Buffy, but I love that.
There was some prosthetic makeup on his character. But
Got it.
once you see it again, you'll be like, oh my god, it's
Yeah. I mean, I love the fact he's still working. He's still doing interesting stuff. I mean, he's been in some very interesting, like high quality TV shows. He's been in The Blacklist, a series of unfortunate events, the OA. You know, he's the guy's working still in good, and I like the range of what he does as well. Interesting guy. But as you say, he's got a very specific role here, and it's. I think you were saying in a previous episode, Catcher, about the confrontation, or was it this episode, about the confrontational nature of these relationships we see in the film, and these two guys. I mean, is this like a satire of the typical, you know, buddy cop thing, or is it more like a kind of verging on the real version of what you would think these guys are actually like? Or do you know what I mean? I love the fact that we're never quite sure, right? We're never quite sure. And they both play it like that. They both play that lovely balance of might be realistic, maybe, or maybe we're just pushing this just a little bit too far.
Yeah.
Married couple-ish, almost a little bit of that.
Yeah, very much.
I mean, more so, I think, if their relationship extended further, it would in a few years they're going to be like an old married couple, but they are well on their way here.
Yeah. I mean, they just need to do a few more stakeouts together and a few more motel nights in one room with 2 beds. You know?
Yeah.
Oh dear, the cliches, but based in reality, sadly. Oh dear.
Cliches
Indeed.
for a reason.
Right.
Yeah, very true, and I think that's the other thing about this film, isn't it? Is every time we hit a cliche, it does something different with it and reminds us why these cliches are there. As you say, you know, these things are based in things that actually make sense in the context, or like even in the twisted way of Martin going, yeah, I'm your therapist. Oh, this guy on the back of the book I just read. Let's go and hit him up and remember, I've got a gun. You know, he just kind of seems within his own framework. There's a logic to that. You know, that and the cliche of having the hitman with the therapist, which again, you know, will become a cliche at this point. There's like more and more people doing it, but you know, it's still something that Grosse Pointe Blank pulls something very different out of the hat from compared to, say, for example, The Sopranos or Analyze This. You know, it does its own thing very well.
I was just going to ask you about Analyze This. Do you know the year that one was released? I know it was after this.
I think it was a year or 2 years after this.
Yeah.
99. Yeah, because we did actually talk about that in the early minutes with Dr. Oatman, and how this time period you've got Analyze This, Analyze That obviously came later, and The Sopranos, all of which are playing on that criminal psychiatrist dynamic, but in a much more real world setting than, for instance, like Silence of the Lambs did, right? Which was,
I mean, Analyze This is 2 years after Grosse Pointe Blank.
Okay.
99.
Yeah.
But we've already had a few other like more serious thriller based things. Like in '92, you had Richard Gere doing Final Analysis with Kim Basinger and putting them back together again. And there's a couple of other movies around that time. You know, it was definitely a thing that was moving from the serious to the comedic, I would say, at this point, as is always the natural trend with these things, you know.
All right.
Okay.
Well, this was minute 18 of the Grosse Pointe Blank podcast, Debi Radio 79.5 FM, and you now know why. Featuring your hosts, co-writers, and co-producers, myself, Dev Soliger, and Hugh David.
Today, our guest on this episode and all episodes this week, catch you later, GPB fan extraordinaire. Where can people find you online if they want to get in touch?
I think they should find me at North Bay Derby. That'll be on Instagram, Facebook. That's the name of our league. Yeah.
Fantastic. You can find us at all good podcast players, including the one you're listening to this on, also on YouTube, Twitter, aka X, and Spotify. In all cases, our handle is at DEBI Radio, Debi Radio, which, as Dev says, you now know why we call that. And our website also is debiradio.com. And once again, it's DEBI Radio.
And if you want to talk with us and share your thoughts about the film, what you love about it, you can join us on our Facebook listeners group. That is Debi Radio 79.5 FM Fan Club.
Sure was clear that all of this was new. Concentrating hard like a little girl, smoking for the first time. It wasn't a moment, it was a feeling.